Every garden has them. Those corners, those stretches along the fence line, those beds that run along the north-facing wall or sit permanently in the shadow of a large tree, or get cut off from direct sunlight by the house itself. Spots where the light never quite arrives with the conviction that most plants seem to need, where previous attempts at growing things have ended in the familiar pattern of slow decline, yellowing leaves, reluctant growth, flowers that never materialize, until eventually you stop trying and the space becomes defined by its emptiness rather than its potential. Most gardeners make the same mistake with these difficult, dark corners. They keep trying plants that need more light than the space offers, hoping that this time it will be different, that this particular variety will somehow manage on less than it requires. Or they accept defeat entirely and cover the ground with bark mulch and call it low maintenance, which is really just another way of saying they've given up. Both of those responses miss something important, because the problem with a dark corner is never actually the darkness. The problem is choosing the wrong plants. Choose the right ones, the plants that evolved specifically for low light conditions, that developed their entire biology in the dappled shade beneath forest canopies and along the sheltered margins of woodland edges. And those difficult corners transform from the garden's most frustrating spaces into some of its most genuinely beautiful ones. April is the month to make that transformation happen. The cool temperatures and increasing day length of early spring are precisely the conditions that shade-loving perennials are designed to exploit. Many of them emerge and establish most vigorously in spring, before the tree canopy closes overhead and reduces light levels further. Planting in April gives them the establishment window they need: cool soil for root development, gentle light for early growth, and the full growing season ahead for building the kind of permanent root system that will sustain increasingly beautiful performance year after year. The 8 perennials on today's list are the finest shade performers available. Each one was chosen because it doesn't just tolerate low light, it genuinely thrives in it, produces its best growth and often its most spectacular display in exactly the conditions that defeat sun-loving plants. Each one is a true perennial that returns every spring with more presence than the year before, and each one contributes something specific and irreplaceable to the dark corner: color, texture, fragrance, structure that turns a problem space into a designed destination. Let me take you through all 8. Number 1 is hosta. There is no plant more synonymous with the shaded garden than hosta. And that association exists not because hostas are the default option for difficult spots, but because they are genuinely, comprehensively, and almost uniquely suited to the conditions that dark corners offer. In deep shade, where almost everything else declines, hostas don't merely survive. They perform with an authority and a visual presence that makes them the unquestioned anchor of any shade planting. The leaves are the entire point. Hosta flowers are pleasant, sometimes fragrant, and the pollinators appreciate them, but it is the foliage that makes hostas extraordinary. And the foliage in a shaded position is better than hosta foliage anywhere else. Deep shade intensifies the blue-gray tones of varieties like halcyon and hadspin blue, turning them from simply attractive to genuinely extraordinary. It protects the delicate chartreuse and gold tones of varieties like Sum and Substance and August Moon from the bleaching and scorching that sun exposure causes. It allows the crisp white margins of varieties like France and Patriot to remain clean and sharp rather than burning at the edges as they do in brighter positions. The annual improvement is one of hosta's defining qualities as a shade perennial. A hosta planted in April of year 1 is a modest, promising plant. By year 3, it is a substantial specimen. By year 5, it is a genuinely impressive architectural presence. Leaves so large and so boldly colored that the corner they occupy becomes a feature of the garden rather than an afterthought. Sum and Substance, which is among the largest hostas in cultivation, produces leaves the size of dinner plates in a mature specimen. Empress Wu, the largest hosta variety available, becomes something that genuinely stops people in their tracks when fully established. The practical requirements are minimal to the point of almost not existing. Cool, moist, well-drained soil. Protection from slugs, which find hosta leaves as appealing as gardeners do. A top dressing of compost each spring before the leaves emerge. Beyond those simple provisions, hostas manage themselves entirely. emerging each spring a little larger, a little more impressive, a little more commanding in the space they occupy. Plant hostas in April, and the cool spring soil gives their crown the establishment conditions it responds to best. The crown, that compressed root mass from which all those magnificent leaves emerge, extends its growing points most actively in cool, moist conditions. April planting means 6 weeks of ideal crown development before summer warmth arrives. And that 6 weeks of early establishment is visible in the plant's performance by July of the first year, and dramatically visible in every year that follows. Number 2 is astilbe. The shaded garden's most persistent visual problem is not the absence of light. It is the absence of vertical movement. Shade-tolerant foliage plants fill the ground plane beautifully, but rarely provide the upward energy, the sense of height and reach and aspiration that makes a planting feel complete rather than simply covered. Astilbe solves that problem with a specificity and a beauty that no other shade perennial quite matches. The flower plumes are the defining feature, feathery arching spires in white, cream, pale pink, hot pink, red, coral, and deep burgundy that rise above the finely cut foliage and catch whatever light reaches the shaded corner in a way that makes them appear almost to glow. In deep shade, where light is directional rather than ambient, astilbe plumes pick up that directional light and carry it visually through the planting with an effect that is genuinely magical on a summer morning when early light angles into a previously dark corner. The crown thickening that drives astilbe's annual improvement works exactly as it does in containers, but with the additional benefit of unlimited root expansion in open ground. Each winter, the crown adds new growing points. Each summer, those points produce more plumes, more numerous, more substantial, more impressive than the year before. A first-year astilbe produces 3 or 4 plumes. A third-year established plant in good conditions produces 10 to 15. A fifth-year plant in ideal moist shade is a genuinely spectacular display that requires nothing from the gardener except the occasional top dressing of compost and consistent moisture through dry spells. Moisture is the non-negotiable requirement. Astilbe in dry shade declines and eventually fails. Astilbe in moist shade thrives with a consistency that makes it one of the most reliable shade perennials available. If your dark corner tends toward dryness, under trees with extensive root systems, along dry walls, address the moisture issue first with generous organic matter incorporated into the soil and a mulch layer maintained throughout the growing season. Give astilbe consistent moisture, and it will give you one of the most beautiful flowering displays the shaded garden can produce, year after year, getting more spectacular with every passing season. Number 3 is bleeding heart. Bleeding heart is the shade perennial that produces the most immediately dramatic and most emotionally arresting spring display of anything on today's list. The arching stems carrying those pendant heart-shaped flowers, rose pink with a protruding white inner petal, or pure white in the alba form, create a display of such romantic, distinctive beauty that a single established plant commands the entire corner it occupies and makes everything around it look more considered simply by association. The flowering season, in the traditional Dicentrus spectabilis, is concentrated in spring, a generous 4 to 6 week performance that coincides perfectly with April planting, meaning that a plant going into the ground this month may produce its first arching stems of those extraordinary flowers before the establishment season is even complete. That immediacy of reward is unusual in perennial gardening and deeply satisfying when it happens. After flowering finishes and the foliage begins to yellow and die back in early summer, a natural dormancy that is sometimes alarming to first-time growers, but is simply the plant's seasonal rhythm, the space left by bleeding heart can be filled by later emerging shade perennials that come into their own as summer progresses. This interplanting approach, using bleeding heart's spring season and early dormancy as part of a planned succession, is one of the most elegant design strategies available in the shaded garden and produces a corner that has something interesting happening in every season. The fringed leaf varieties, Dicentra formosa and its cultivars like Luxuriant and King of Hearts, are more compact, flower over a longer season, and don't go dormant in summer, making them valuable companions to the traditional arching spectabilis forms. Together, the two types cover the full range of the shade garden's seasonal needs with a beauty and a consistency that justifies planting both in the same corner. April planting for Bleeding Heart captures the cool, moist conditions that this spring native plant establishes in most vigorously. The root system, fleshy, brittle, and needing careful handling at planting, establishes through the cool spring weeks and produces that first season of flowering from a position of genuine root strength rather than stressed establishment. Number 4 is lungwort. Lungwort is the April shade plant that delivers more in the earliest weeks of the gardening year than almost anything else on this list. And it delivers it in a corner that in March and early April might still look bare, still look dormant, still look like the garden hasn't properly decided to begin yet. The flowers appear before the leaves are fully developed, which gives lungwort a freshness and an immediacy that feels like an announcement. The blooms open pink and age to blue on the same plant simultaneously, a bicolor effect that happens naturally through the flower's aging process and creates clusters of mixed pink and blue above the emerging foliage with a charm that is completely distinctive to this plant. No other shade perennial produces this naturally occurring color shift in the same way, and the effect is delicate and beautiful in a manner that perfectly suits the tentative light of early spring. But the foliage is what makes lungwort genuinely valuable as a permanent shade perennial rather than simply a spring performer. The leaves of most varieties are spotted, splashed, or almost entirely covered in silver-white markings on a dark green base, a pattern so distinctive and so ornamentally valuable that the plant earns its place in the dark corner on foliage alone, independent of the spring flowers. In deep shade, where variegated and silver-marked foliage performs best, lungwort leaves create a bright, light-reflective ground layer that lifts the entire visual quality of the space. They catch and hold whatever light reaches the corner, bouncing it back into the planting and creating a sense of brightness that the actual light levels don't fully account for. Established lungwort spreads steadily to form weed-suppressing clumps that cover the ground beneath taller shade perennials with a density that keeps maintenance minimal. Combined with hostas above and a stilbe rising above both, lungwort provides the low ground layer that completes a three-tiered shade planting with a professionalism that looks designed and expensive. Number 5 is foxglove. Foxglove is the shade perennial that solves the dark corners vertical problem more dramatically and more immediately than any other plant on today's list. Where a stilbe provides gentle upward movement at a modest height, foxglove rises with a confidence and a presence that is genuinely architectural. Those tall, commanding spires of tubular flowers reaching 4, 5, sometimes 6 feet above the garden floor and creating a vertical statement that transforms the proportions of any corner they occupy. The flowers are extraordinary. Tubular, pendant, and carried in dense, one-sided spires. They come in white, cream, soft yellow, pale pink, rose, deep purple, and the classic spotted forms with intricate dark markings inside the throat that give each individual flower a complexity and a beauty that rewards close examination. In a shaded corner where light is low and colors tend toward the quiet, those spotted throats catch whatever light reaches them and create small points of intricate detail that lift the entire planting. Foxglove is technically biennial in its classic digitalis purpurea form, flowering in its second year and then setting seed. But it self-seeds so prolifically and so reliably that once established in a corner, it maintains a permanent presence, with plants at different stages of their 2-year cycle ensuring flowers every season without replanting. The perennial species, particularly Digitalis grandiflora with its soft yellow flowers and Digitalis lutea, return reliably every year and build into increasingly substantial clumps that flower more generously with each successive season. April planting captures the cool establishment window that foxglove uses most productively. The root system builds through the cool spring weeks, positioning the plant for its most vigorous growth through summer and its most spectacular flowering the following season. In the dark corner, plant foxgloves toward the back, where those tall spires can rise against the fence or wall behind them, the vertical lines of the flowers echoing the vertical lines of the boundary and creating a composed, intentional quality that makes the corner feel designed. Number 6 is Solomon's Seal. Solomon's Seal is the shade perennial that the most experienced and most thoughtful gardeners consistently return to, not because it is dramatic or immediately attention-grabbing, but because it has a quality of elegance and refinement that more showy plants simply don't possess. The arching stems, the paired leaves arranged in perfect horizontal ranks along those stems, the small pendant white flowers hanging in neat rows beneath the foliage like tiny bells. Everything about Solomon's seal is precise, measured, and quietly beautiful. That precise architectural quality makes it invaluable in a dark corner where the temptation is to fill every inch with flowering plants and end up with a space that feels busy and overcrowded rather than considered and calm. Solomon's seal provides structure and elegance rather than color and abundance, and in doing so, it creates the visual breathing room that makes everything flowering around it look more beautiful by contrast. The arching stems reach 2 to 3 feet in established plants, creating a mid-height layer of horizontal movement that contrasts beautifully with the upright spires of foxglove behind and the low, ground-covering clumps of lungwort and tiarella below. The variegated form, Polygonatum odoratum variegatum, adds cream-edged leaves to the refined arching habit and is one of the most elegant shade plants in cultivation. Plant Solomon's seal in April, give it the cool, moist conditions it establishes in best, and within 3 seasons it forms a colony of those graceful, arching stems that defines the corner with a quiet authority that nothing else provides. Number 7 is hellebore. Hellebore earns a position on this list through a quality that no other plant here possesses. It flowers in the darkest, coldest months of the year. While everything else in the shaded corner is dormant or just emerging, hellebores are in full, extraordinary bloom from January through April, providing color and life and genuine beauty in the garden's most difficult season. The flowers are nodding, cup-shaped, and carried in colors that range from pure white and soft cream through every shade of pink and rose to deep plum, near black, and the extraordinary spotted and pickety forms that look hand-painted. An established hellebore clump in February, covered in those nodding flowers above the dark evergreen foliage, is one of the most quietly spectacular sights in the winter garden. As a permanent shade perennial, hellebore builds steadily into a substantial, increasingly beautiful clump that requires almost no maintenance beyond removing the previous year's leaves in late winter to show the emerging flowers clearly. Self-seeds around established plants, gradually colonizing the dark corner with a naturalness that looks completely intentional. Number 8 is tiarella. Tiarella closes the list as the finest ground-covering shade perennial available for April planting. A plant that covers the soil beneath taller perennials with a density and a beauty that keeps the dark corner looking full, weed-free, and genuinely designed through every season of the year. The foliage is extraordinary, deeply lobed, marked with dark central patterns that trace the leaf veins in burgundy or near black against green, and carried in low spreading mounds that expand steadily outward to cover ground with an evenness that more upright plants cannot provide. In spring, delicate white or soft pink flower spikes rise above the foliage like tiny foam-tipped wands. Tiarella's common name, foam flower, describes this flowering perfectly, adding a vertical element to the ground layer that gives the whole planting a completeness it would otherwise lack. The spreading habit is steady and manageable, generous enough to cover ground effectively, but never aggressive enough to overwhelm neighboring plants. Within 2 seasons of April planting, tiarella forms a complete carpet beneath hostas, astilbe, and Solomon's seal that suppresses weeds, retains moisture, and provides year-round foliage interest that keeps the corner looking cared for regardless of season. 8 plants, 1 dark corner, a transformation that begins in April and builds with every passing year into something genuinely beautiful. Hostas expanding their magnificent leaves from ground level upward, getting more impressive every season. Astilbe, rising with feathery plumes that glow in directional morning light. Bleeding Heart, arching its extraordinary pendant flowers in the first weeks of spring. Lungwort, brightening the ground layer with silver-spotted leaves that reflect light back into the shadow. Foxglove, standing tall against the back wall with architectural spires of spotted tubular flowers. Solomon's seal, arching its elegant stems in perfect horizontal precision through the middle layer. Hellebore, holding its nodding, cup-shaped blooms through the darkest months when nothing else is performing. Tiarella, carpeting the ground beneath everything with deeply lobed, dark-marked foliage and foam-tipped flower spikes in spring. layered from ground to boundary, flowering from January through summer, getting more established, more beautiful, and more permanently impressive with every April that passes. The dark corner is not the garden's problem. It never was. It was always waiting for the right plants. Plant these 8 in April, and it becomes the garden's most quietly extraordinary destination. Thank you for watching this video. Click here to watch another video that might interest you.